Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR. I'm George Binns, and this evening we're going to continue a discussion that Elliott Margolis started with Dr. Janice Magno.
Yes.
And she wrote a big book about the way out, which is really, it's fiction, but it's a composite of lots of different people I guess you've talked to over the years.
Yes.
And their experiences, and you put it all together in the person of one Alexandra.
That's right.
And would recommend that you do watch Elliott's two shows, Conservative Corner, where they go, you two went through the details of what her experience was and so forth. And this is titled A Way Out, which is, I guess, a realization that all of a sudden you're in a problem and you got to get out of it. And this is the way that this one particular lady worked her way out of it. And now you're starting a second book. What's the theme behind that one?
It's a way forward.
Yeah.
Once you get out of a abusive relationship, you begin pretty much a new life. Mm-hmm. And where you go from there is all about the people you meet, the choices you make, and you keep moving forward. Mm-hmm. You're moving away from that life you lived, and you start to acquire new friendships. Mm-hmm. You learn more about yourself, your interests, your value, and you pursue those interests with the support of friends. Mm-hmm. And as A Way Out mentions, you have a newfound faith. And in that faith, you're directed very much by God and your faith, and you continue to move forward. Mm-hmm. And the book really does talk about how you move forward. Yeah. In Alexandra's case, yeah. Other women may move forward in a different way, but in Alexandra's case, it really was about her newfound faith and every step she took from the moment she left that abusive relationship.
So this new book is a continuum of Alexandra's escape, if we will, from...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It continues her life story.
You mentioned that different women get into different situations and respond differently to it. And one of the things that surprised me was while we were talking about this kind of a show, or while I was watching your two episodes with Elliott, TED Talks came up with an interesting little 15-minute blurb about one woman who was in an abusive relationship, how she got in it and how she got out of it. And she was trying to answer the question of, well, why do women stay?
Yes.
And her explanation was something called crazy love.
Yes.
That she got into a relationship, she thought she knew what she was doing. Yes. She thought she was essentially operating within reasonable parameters, is probably the fancy way to put it. So escaping or getting out of it took a while to suddenly dawn on her.
Yes.
Is this kind of a thought process consistent with what you've been seeing, or is that what you mean by a different way?
You shared that article with me, yeah. And it is so true to call your relationship a crazy love, because anyone looking from the outside would see what you're not seeing.
Yeah.
And then you're subjecting yourself to a variety of abuses. Sometimes they start very simply or innocently. I'm not quite sure I like what you're wearing.
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure I like that hairstyle on you. And then it would advance. Sometimes you'd be in public situations where ridicule will start to creep in. And it's almost like the story of the frog in the water.
Oh, yeah.
You don't realize that as the temperature is going up, you're adjusting to the new temperature until, in the frog's case, it's fatal.
Yeah.
It can also be fatal in the human condition unless you have a realization this crazy love has got to end.
Yeah.
Because if it doesn't end with one of you getting out, it could end in a disastrous way.
Yeah.
So yes, it very much speaks to the life of Alexandra and the life of many women.
Mm-hmm.
In the case of Alexandra, however, she grew up in an environment where crazy love was being manifested by the parents. And that is what she saw, that is what she believed relationships were made of.
Yeah.
In this particular article, the character here did not have that kind of an upbringing.
No, she started out. Well, that's the whole story of it. It can happen in a lot of ways.
Yes,
and,
that's right.
You mentioned it can be fatal. Last year in Massachusetts, there were 19 domestic violence homicides, which doesn't sound like a lot, but
in such a short period of time.
A short period of time, yeah. And you start to look at it nationwide, and you're starting to get into the hundreds of thousands of cases. And one of the things I always remember from the O.J. Simpson trial was they had a proposition that O.J. Simpson, because he was a known wife beater, didn't necessarily mean he was going to kill his wife, because the ratio was something like 2,000 to 1 between the number of abusive relationships and the number of fatalities. And in the real world, what you have to excuse me, ask is not how many times they've been involved in an abusive, but given that you've got a dead woman, what is the probability that she was previously abused, and now it comes up to like 95%. So it's a serious problem, and one of the things is there's a lot of entities trying to work on it. Beverly Police Department has a special unit.
Many police departments, yeah.
But we're talking mainly Beverly people, so
of course.
Local guys, they're here. They can take care of you. And they have a unit combined of not only police, but social workers.
Yes.
And that gets to be a debate that goes back and forth of who should answer the phone, who should show up at the door when somebody calls for help. And from your background, you're a PhD in education, psychology. How do you think a social worker can help or hinder or get involved in one of these calls?
I think it has to be more of a collaborative effort. I think that it's the police who has to maintain the security and safety of the individuals involved. Mm-hmm. once that danger, imminent danger, is addressed, then you can have the social worker work with the individual members of the family to help them get the services they will need. The repetitiveness of this, and I'm sure the police department in Beverly will tell you how many times they go to a specific home quite frequently, because the change is not an automatic. It is an extraordinary process. You're talking about behavior that has to really undergo almost a cathartic change. And sometimes you have to separate and put the perpetrator someplace and the victim someplace else, and then the children. So it's a complicated process that really requires a team and collaborative approach.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be the way it's going nowadays. There's several organizations around. One is HAWC. And they're located over in the Salem area.
Yes.
And
they've been around for quite a while.
They're over in Shetland Park.
Yes.
And they provide these kind of multiple services, multiple connections kind of routine. And, excuse me, one of the other online things I popped up is there's 6 steps of breaking the cycle. And one is creative self-awareness, build your individuality, create an emotional distance, de-triangulate from toxic relationships, and psychoeducational resources, and self-compassion, start the self-healing process. So it's been thought out.
Oh, yes.
And the question is, how do you get somebody into the position where they can get that kind of help?
The first step you mentioned is self-awareness.
Yeah.
If you continue to live in a world of deniability or denying what's happening to you, you're unable to take the following steps. So that first step is being aware of the situation you're in, but also being aware that you have value. You're important, and you do not deserve to be treated that way. Even in its mildest form of ridicule, sarcasm, control, determining who you're going to be friends with, where you're going to go, decision-making, standing up for yourself. As I say that, I'm reminded of a scene from the Julia Roberts movie, Pretty Woman.
Yeah.
And he turns to her and says, "You don't even know the kind of egg you like." And there's a scene in the movie where she tries poached eggs and fried eggs and omelets, but she realizes that she's not been aware of herself. She's not taken hold of the opportunities that are going to be presented to her. And that is the very first step. Can you do that on your own? I don't believe you can. In Alexandra's case, friends begin to tell her that her life is not a healthy one. They try to tell her that she has a responsibility to her children, which is a whole other element of abuse, is that you are, by your behavior, perpetuating the whole idea of abuse, telling in Alexandra's case, where she had 2 boys, that this is the way you treat women.
Yeah.
And that you're teaching them that by virtue of staying there, by having that happen to you, you're actually teaching them this is how you treat a woman. And so the most important piece in Alexandra's case was that she went to read books. She started looking at self-help books, started to understand what does abusive relationships and behavior look like. Can I identify with that? And in her case, that's how she began the process of self-awareness, and then began to finally seek out professional help, professional counseling.
Yeah. Well, I guess the question is, okay, go see a psychiatrist, psychologist, some kind of professional. What kind of help can they give you? How can they get into your situation and come up with some guidance as to where to go next?
Well, they're trained
Yeah.
to put a mirror in front of you, not to get in the way of the therapy, but to really put a mirror in front of you for you to see what it is that you're living, your life as it is, and for you to begin to reflect on that. There are moments in anyone's life where they don't want to deal with the reality. It's difficult. Mm-hmm. It's uncomfortable. However, the therapist is trained to help you see yourself as you are in this particular situation. It then falls back on you to make a decision. And some women can't make the decision. Mm-hmm. They don't have the willpower. They don't have the self-esteem. And part of the reason for writing the book is to take the veil of secrecy off the abuse that exists in our society, mm-hmm. that exists in our home. Let's talk about it. Because many of these women are living secret lives, ashamed. Alexandra speaks to the fact that she believes it's her fault. She's led to believe it's her fault. This is what she deserves. And turning that around is really the work of a skillful therapist who can walk you through that. It's not stated in the book, but by the time Alexandra finds the therapist she can really work with, she had gone through 2 other therapists, and she was just not relating with these people at all. And so that's also another issue of finding the person that's going to be honest with you and allow you to make the changes that you need to make.
Well, I guess it's more than just allow. You've got to... I guess the role of the therapist, what I would expect, is somehow or other to push you in the right direction, because you're not going to go there by yourself. There needs to be some sort of motivation. And as you point out, that in this case of Alexandra, she grew up in a household that was abusive, and probably in her mind was the concept of, well, that's just the way it is. And
very true.
When she ended up with 2 boys, she's sort of perpetuating it, in that, well, that's the way I was treated, and you're going to expect that's the way that you're going to react to these situations. And I guess it's one thing to have a therapist hold up the mirror and say, look at yourself, and this is what is going on. And to some extent, she, Alexandra, or somebody like her, has already made the decision that, well, that's the way it is. Yeah, that's the way I am. So there's got to be, to my way of thinking, some way to turn this around and say, that may be the way you are, but that ain't the way you should be. And there's difference between that, what you are and what you should be, what you can become, routine. That seems to be, to me, the big stumbling block of how do you get that across?
In part, you begin to identify your strengths. The therapist helps you. What do you like to do? What do you dream about? Do you see yourself to have anything you really enjoy doing? And it could be as simple as I like baking.
Yeah.
I like drawing. Very simple. Well, do you do it? Well, no. Well, maybe you should start to do it.
Yeah.
And it's a piece at a time. It's that complex puzzle of 1,000 pieces that you're putting together, where that one completed, a full picture emerges of really what you're capable of doing, what you're capable of being. And that's the help of the therapist, to have you begin looking at that part of your life. What colors do you like? When you go shopping, is there anything there that attracts you, that you say, I could see myself wearing that. I could see myself in that. And those are the little steps that begin to separate you from that abusive relationship, that triangulation that they try to separate you from, that the article talks about. And it's a long process, but it is a process that saves your life.
Yeah.
And it saves the lives of your children.
Well, it's more than just a metaphysical saving of life. It's actual.
Yes.
There's been a number of unfortunate events that have happened because people just can't get away soon enough, quick enough, far enough, kind of routine. And I think that's another part of the game of, okay, you've devised a recognition that this relationship is not good, got to get out of it, got to get out of here. Where do I go? And I think there are some organizations around that do provide temporary housing for women in trouble. The nasty part of it is they take the kids away. They don't necessarily stay with the parent. That is a trauma that has to somehow or other be accommodated.
You mentioned this, George, and friends of ours, 2-3 sets of friends, are raising their grandchildren because their daughters, in each case, it was a daughter who was living in an abusive relationship and took to drugs, took to alcohol, was not able to take care of their children. And it's very close to home. And I think many of your viewers will probably know people who are raising their grandchildren because their children are unable to take care of their grandchildren. And abusive relationships oftentimes have these women take drugs or alcohol to the extreme as a way of...
It's an escape.
Escaping, but
or
as a way
accommodating,
of,
whatever you want to call it.
yeah, of coping.
Coping.
I guess it's a coping which is not coping.
Yeah. It's
It's
one it's solving one problem, creating others.
it's rampant in our society. We
Yeah.
don't spend enough time looking at it, providing resources for it, and really working to eradicate it.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the primary problems that we have put under the rug. And I was hoping in writing the book that it could shed light, that the book can get into the hands of those who need it to see there is a way out,
Yeah.
and soon there'll be a way forward.
Yeah. So that really what it comes down to is recognition you got a problem, deciding you got to do something about it, and then having the resources, grandparents in some cases, or family members that can somehow or other support you while you fight your way out of this situation. Because you can't just simply just walk away from it. It doesn't happen that easy. It's a continual battle, I would imagine.
Well, one of the benefits that Alexandra has in her life that many women do not have is the fact that she was educated and she had a career. And so she was self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And job training for women is critical for them to be able to economically support themselves and their children. And that's a critical component. Just as the counseling is important, job training is critical.
Yeah. So I guess we'll just sit back and wait till the next issue shows up. And it's been interesting, and I think it's not an easy question to answer. And the solutions are difficult. You just got to work at it. And it takes an awful lot of support structure to do it. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us this evening. And as I mentioned many times, if you've got a comment, my email address is at the end of the credits. And if you want to make a longer statement, there's room for you here at the table. Thanks again for watching, and stay tuned.